I think working as an emergency vet for that length of time, you get really good at talking to people and counseling people through those difficult scenarios. I don't want to sound too eat, pray, love in it, but it does I think, I don't know, makes you like a nicer person.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gerardo Poli.
And this, sorry. Okay.
I'm Gerardo Poli.
I'm Hubert Hemstra, and this is the Vet Vault. Welcome back. We've missed you too. We hope that you've been enjoying the occasional clinical episodes, and if you are and you want more short, sharp, super useful clinical podcasts, remember to check them out at vvn.supercast.tech. That's Tech. But we're back today with another full-length vet interview, and it's a corker if I can say so myself. We're exploring the ins and outs, the ups and downs, and the joys and struggles of the career path that is close to mine and Gerardo's hearts, emergency practice, with Dr. Lorna O'Dowd. You'll pick where Lorna qualified and cut her teeth in mixed practice from her lovely Irish accent. But since her early career in Ireland, Lorna has spent a stint of locuming in smallies practice as well as volunteering in all sorts of exotic locations around the world, until she finally put her roots down right here in Australia and followed a path that saw her working and teaching in the emergency department at the University of Melbourne for the past decade. At the time of recording this, she just started a new job in ECC in a private specialist clinic, which leads us straight into a great conversation about change, dealing with new jobs and teams and the associated stresses, how to pick a team that fits with your values, and how to add value to your team. We talk about imposter syndrome, burnout, being a good mentee, and death, a very important topic that we haven't really touched on before, when our patients die, with or without our help, and how we deal with it. And of course, we couldn't talk to a fellow ECC geek without asking her for her best tips on how to survive a career in emergency with shift work and high-stress situations. We think you're going to love Lorna. I know we did. So let's get to it with Dr. Lorna O'Dowd. Hello, Vet Vaulters, and welcome back to another episode. Welcome, Lorna O'Dowd, to the podcast. We are thrilled to have you, and welcome, Gerardo.
Hey, team.
Thanks very much for having me. I was pretty chuffed when you guys asked, except for when the day dawned this morning, and then I felt pretty nervous.
Nothing to be nervous about. If anybody's going to make a fool of himself, it'll be Gerardo.
I try not to, but it just happens.
Now, we're thrilled to have you. You came highly recommended. And you know what we realized? Despite the fact that both of Gerardo and I have been working in emergency for a long time, we haven't actually interviewed an emergency vet. We haven't talked about emergency as a career.
Wow, I thought you'd be totally biased.
Let's begin with you. I'd love to hear about your story and your journey from Ireland to Australia and from mixed practice to emergency vet. But I want to start at the end, and we'll work our way back towards the beginning a little bit later. You've just started a new job, is that correct?
Yeah, I have indeed. So I just started at Southpaws, which are a clinic here in Melbourne. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm 2 weeks in and it's going pretty good. It was a big transition after 9 years of my last job. So yeah, it's been a bit of a stressful time, but also been quite exciting. And the team there are really lovely. So thus far, all good with that.
But still working in emergency, is that right?
Yeah, I guess primarily a surgery specialty practice, but they're trying to offer a broader range of services to their clients. And a lot of the cases that they see, though they might be surgical, they can be quite complex. Mm-hmm. So there's some adrenalectomies and septic abdomens and chest traumas. So, the kind of cases that do require a multidisciplinary approach. So yeah, my role there is ECC, and we're kind of, I guess, expanding that team, or the hope is we're expanding that team.
So is that taking emergencies, managing emergencies during the day, triaging them, and then maybe, directing them towards medicine or surgery, but then also managing the critical care unit or something like that? Is that what it looks like?
So really, it's not primary or like first step in an emergency that we're doing. It's more so that we do the critical care side of the cases that are complex cases, like those adrenalectomies, so for instance, that need some management beforehand, some stabilization, and then postoperatively they can be a bit of a nightmare. So that's where we come in, manage those cases. But these guys are pretty good surgeons, so that's what they do. And then for us,
they leave you to clean up the mess. That's the problem.
Yeah, but if we're honest, we like that. I mean, it is kind of fun.
Absolutely. Now, Lorna, you said that it's been quite a stressful time what about the process have you found stressful? Is it just the new job, or give me a bit of a background. Why have you experienced it as stressful?
I guess was change is always a bit stressful, really, isn't it? No matter whether that change is a good change or not, So I think making the decision to leave a place that I loved was hard, and that was stressful. I made a lot of good friends along the way in where I worked, and I had a lot of great people around me, and I was very comfortable after being there for 9 years. So I think making that decision to leave was hard, and it was stressful. And then I guess making sure that I found somewhere to go to that was a good fit. I didn't want to make that change and then have to make the change again. So making the decision and following your gut that it's the right decision, all of that was kind of stressful. But I mean, stress isn't always bad, right? Some stress is good, maybe helps you to go in the right direction, I guess, or makes you really focus on making that decision the right decision to some degree. So it was hard, but a right decision, I feel, for me. And so you grow with all of that change and that stress as well. It's hard to manage it in the moment, but I guess you got to trust that the journey is the right one that you're taking, and it's for the right reasons, and that ultimately the outcome will be what you want.
Yeah, well, what was the that TED talk about perception of stress? It's one of the most famous TED talks, and it wasn't necessarily the stress itself or having stress, it was the perception of stress and what it meant. If you thought stress was, I didn't need this, didn't want this, well, that kind of stuff, that's super stressful, right? But then if you thought the outcome would be that you were better, stronger, more resilient, more knowledgeable, or something like that, then the perception of stress isn't less stressful. But having said that, emergency is pretty stressful, kind of prepares you for quite a few things. So
I guess it is, but maybe like as emergency vets, we don't find that stressful either. You do maybe at the start, but then it doesn't continue to be that same kind of stressful or erodes away at you. I think, at least anyhow, I think other people maybe who come in are like bleed in and out of it, or when you start, that it can be the kind of stress that's really impactful. But I guess there's different kinds of stress, and some people thrive on the emergency stress, but then the life decisions and the day-to-day can be that kind of stress that's a bit toxic. But I guess it's how long you're undergoing that stress. So changing a job was like a finite time,
Yeah. Look, it's our timing is pretty much exactly coincided. So I left my old job of 12 years, so 7 years in emergency there, and 5 years prior to that in the same practice, and left pretty much, I left there in mid-June last year, and then started 2 new jobs in the last month. So moved interstate, so big decisions, and then the 2 new jobs. And I was kind of blown away because, again, I'm back in emergency again with one of the jobs, and I was shocked at how nervous I was. You think I'm seriously, after 8 years of emergency, and as you say, there's stress in emergency, but I think what it is familiarity. So there's stress, but you have some degree of control, because in your clinic that you've been in for 12 years, you don't realize that you know exactly where everything is, and so even when things are falling apart, I know where to turn to solve it. And suddenly you feel a bit lost. And then the other thing that I realized, I thought about it long and hard. I was like, what? The morning sitting outside of the new job, sitting there, feeling really nervous, and I try to evaluate what am I scared of, and a lot of it is ego, because now it's suddenly a bit like, I just don't want to look like an idiot in front of these people. Everybody knew me at my last job. I was a big shot there, I'd proven myself, and suddenly I'm the new guy, and you just don't want to. And I thought there was something wrong with me, but then I had a chat to a colleague who I really respect. We went for a run during that time, and he told me he had to go and do a solo night shift at one of their businesses, and he hasn't done a solo consulting night shift in a very long time. And he said he was shitting himself. He was like, am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to stuff it up? And I'm like, dude, you're a specialist. And I felt so good to hear that everybody put somebody out of their comfort zone, and suddenly your head's not right. You're just not quite there.
When you talked about being concerned about being a fool, you've been running this podcast, mate. It's about 50 episodes where you're a fool. So I'm sure they've heard it all already.
No, but it's exactly the first few episodes we did. I was very nervous. And then you get familiar, you start getting into comfort zone. But I thought a lot, and let's get back to Lorna's opinion here, but I've thought a lot about new grads during this process. Going, man, if I'm this scared, I've forgotten how scared I was as a recent graduate.
Oh gosh.
It's very scary. Have you come up with any strategies through all of this? Any tips that you could give to people how to adapt to that new role and how to shake some of that stress?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that about new grads, because like if we're stressed after how many years of working in these environments, going into a new job, and then you take somebody who's never been in that position before, it's amplified by a million, right? So it's good to think in that way, because obviously I've come from an environment where I thought a lot of students who are in their final year, and so I got asked that question a lot about going into jobs and what was good advice. And I think in truth, like we all maybe suffer a little bit from like the imposter syndrome, where we think we're not good enough, and where like you say, we're going to like be shown up as a complete fool, and so you're willing to take whatever job is offered to you because you're like, oh, I can't believe they even offered me a job. I better take it before they figure out who they're dealing with. I think that's maybe where people go wrong. I took quite a bit of time in deciding on this job, and not deciding really like in terms of the clinical side of things whether or not I'd be a good fit, because I think in truth, as vets, we're all pretty open to learning and upskilling and reskilling, and I don't think that's a problem. I think for the most part that generally excites us when we're learning new things, but I think being a good personal fit, like having the same kind of values and ethos and as the practice does in general, I think that's where the key is, or at least for me, I think that's where the key is, because if you're kind of on a battle on a personal level, it's never going to work, and you're not going to be happy there, you're going to be frustrated, and I don't think it's a good for either involved. So I spent a lot of time thinking about that, whether I was a good fit for them and them for me. And I think going to the place was important for me, just absorbing the kind of atmosphere, were people kind of, happy, and, what was the overall like feel. And I think some of it's intuition as well, because what works for somebody isn't necessarily going to work for another person, right? I think then trusting into your intuition that it is a good fit for you, rather than rushing in just because you feel like you're not going to get another job. And I think new grads certainly, that's a big thing for them, because they're so stressed about not getting the job. But I think your first job is, pretty pivotal and pretty instrumental in kind of forming your relationship with veterinary as a whole. And so I would encourage, I guess, new grads to like take their time and make sure they're going somewhere that's supportive of new grads, with people who are willing to teach and to support them in the after hours period, because otherwise I think it's just so incredibly daunting and can be an awful experience. I think like my first job, I was so lucky, like so super lucky. One of the questions the student asked me when I did a student panel discussion with some new grads, and they asked me about mentors, and I didn't realize at the time that in my first job I had a mentor, because like there just wasn't that name on the relationship. But it was a guy another vet in the practice who he'd been a couple of years ahead of me in uni, and we'd loosely been friends. We'd been on the same drinking team and a couple of things like that. He kind of took me under his wing when I went into the practice and took care of me, and so did the bosses as well. They really took care of me. But I think that was pretty important, to have a support network and to have people you can reach out to and to talk you through problems. And the other thing about that practice is, like, though he was my mentor, this other vet, he also became my best friend. So he had a social outlet. Because I think a lot of people do that when they start off vet. You're so excited, you're finally realizing your dream and your passion, and you give your all to it, and you're like, you stay and you scrub into all these surgeries and you do the extra calls and you do, the extra hours. And then before you know it, you're a few years in and somebody asks you what hobbies you have, and you realize you've got none because you've totally lost yourself to the job, right? So I think that's something else that's pretty important, not lose your identity in amongst it all. Like, you're a vet, yes, but you should also have all these other outlets, because I think you need them if it's going to be a sustainable profession for you.
There's so many things you said. You just, if you're not careful, you start to think yourself in your head that everything about you is vet. Like, so when you explain who are you, how I identify myself with my job. My job is just how I, earn money, demonstrate value to the community, share what I know with the world and so forth. But it's a vehicle through which I can do things and do the things I want to do, but it doesn't actually mean that's who you are. And then some people just make it their whole entire lives or get lost in it. And all of us do, like we totally do, like I do as well. And until you kind of realize that, holy hell, there's so many different aspects to me. I'm a father, I'm a partner, I'm a cyclist, I'm a runner, whatever it is. So literally you can pick whatever it is that you want to identify yourself with. So yeah, that's really important. I think people don't really realize the importance of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the early years, especially, right? Because it's very all consuming, can be. And it's only after you start to burn out that you realize that all consuming nature of it is actually not healthy.
So how do you stop that? What are your strategies to actively prevent that from happening?
I think trying to be mindful of the number of hours you work and the number of like overtime hours you're working, and whether or not, you know, you're accepting all of these extra shifts and hours. I think sometimes we feel like to be a team player, you have to say yes to everything. And, you know, it's okay to actually say no, because there's no point going in if you're resentful that you're going in, but you can't say no. So I think that's one thing. Like, and I think as a profession as a whole, we're probably pretty bad at self-regulating ourselves and regulating breaks and the hours we work. And I think it's quite widely accepted within our profession that we'll work overtime. And so I think, be prepared to stand up and say no and to walk out the door and not feeling like you're a horrific person, letting everybody down, you know. That's one thing, I guess.
Yeah, I want to add to that because I 100% agree with you, but it is hard because by nature, I think most vets we want to please people. We want to help. So if the boss or your co-worker says, hey, can you do this? Do you mind staying back? And especially when you're new, you want to look good. You want to, you want to show that you are. And this literally happened to me in a new job recently, where somebody said, can you do this extra shift? And I knew I couldn't for heaps of reasons. I physically could do it, but it would not be the right decision for me or my family. But I opened my mouth to say, yeah, I could do it. And then I had to stop myself and go, no, you can't do this. This is a very bad idea. But it was really hard for me to say, no, you know what, I actually can't. And then watching their face be kind of surprised and disappointed. And then feeling like a dickhead because I just, but I was thinking, man, I hope they don't feel like I'm a lazy slob now. But I justified it to myself. And I think this might be an important way for people to think about it. I might not be able to do this shift for you now, and you, my boss, might be disappointed now. But because I'm mindful of that and protecting my own well-being and protecting my relationships or my friendships or my hobbies, I'm the vet who's still going to be here 5 years later. I'm not going to be the vet who has to quit the job because they can't put up with it because they burned out. When you need me 5 years down the line, I'll be here.
What you're saying there is essentially that you have to be aware of what it is that you need and it's important to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because like number two, so of the top three things that new graduates wanted in the big survey that wasn't done in the States, number one was support and mentorship. So I have something to say there because you talked about a mentor before, but number two was work-life balance. And so you go to a boss and you go, oh, I want to make sure that I have work-life balance. And you're like, cool. And like, what does it even look like for you? You know, everyone's work-life balance is different. And I think that, you know, what Hubert did was he identified that actually this is what it looks like for me. And he stood up for it. But some people don't understand what or know what it means. For them, what it looks like for them, I
think everybody has to draw their own lines in the sand, because like you could argue like with emergency that the hours are insane or they're crazy, the back-to-back shifts, but it depends on where you're at in your life. If you want to work like, you know, 4 12-hour shifts in a row and then have like 5 days off, you know, like, you know, that can work for you. So it just depends on whatever works for you.
It is tough as well because you do want to help out, and you should sometimes go above and beyond. It's just not every time, all the time that somebody asks, because there is a trend, and I see it on the business owners talking amongst each other saying, well, some of these young vets just have zero, they won't go any further than they'll just go no. and it puts the rest of the team in an awkward position. So I think there will be opportunities where, if you can, don't be stubborn about it. Go, yeah, okay, I'll step up, I'll help out. But if it happens again, and the third time it happens, or the fourth time, you need to be able to say, well, something's wrong here. Either we need to change the management system, or this isn't for me.
Yeah, it's being a team player, but you also can't be taken advantage of, you know. Somebody's always asking you to stay late and work through your lunch and work every weekend, you know. It's okay to say no to those things. That's not really fair.
I also think that it's from a business owner perspective, it really does come down to some degree, and this is, you know, a lot of people are going to hate me for saying this, but it comes down to planning, bench planning team, redundancy in your team, finding enough staff. And it's like, there's no vets out there, no vets want to stay. If no vet wants to stay, maybe you look at what you're doing to provide your vets to stay or not stay, you know. And it hurts when a vet leaves our practice, because it takes 2 years to train a good emergency vet, right? So when they leave after 2.5 years, we feel like there's a loss. But constantly, we're planning, like sometimes 12 months in advance. We have to plan now and start developing strategies and start putting the seeds, you know, feelers out there. How are we going to get recruits at 12 months in advance? So to be able to make sure that people don't feel like as if they have to jump in and say yes, because a lot of the burnout that we see is because exactly what we talked about. People jump in to help because they want to help the team, get it, but then when they burn out, as a business owner, it's not their fault, right? You know, if we planned better somehow, if we were better employees, if we had better systems, better support systems, then ideally our staff would stay for longer. So it took me a while to figure that out, and now that the fact that I understand that, now we look in 12 months in advance and developing support systems more than we ever did before. Because back when I was an employee, back when I was an emergency vet, it was literally, you just worked, you worked, you know, 20-hour shifts, 22-hour shifts, whatever it was, just got the job done. And then bam, relationships break down. So, but you said something before, Lorna, about mentor, right? And this was, I agree, because we might graduate at the same time, must be around the same time, or whatever it was, but like a mentor support thing is really, in my mind, only come out and has been this kind of, you know, important thing in the last maybe 5 years, 5-6 years, I don't know. And I've never heard of it before. But before then, it was just like, you want to find support, and so you try and find a job. But like now everyone's trying to find their mentor, which I think is great, and they definitely need to do, because a good mentor can fast track your journey. But then I think there's a certain amount of onus on the mentee, on the person who wants a mentor, to find the right mentor for them, and then communicate their expectations, so that mentor then knows that all of a sudden this person is looking to them for this stuff and can provide for it, as opposed to, you didn't mentor me, and you're like, holy shit, like, what do you want from me for the last 12 months? I didn't know, you know, I thought I was providing support. No, but you wanted this, you know. So clarity for a mentor is what I would like to put back on the person who wanted a mentor. If that makes sense.
It's getting a bit confusing. Mentor or
mentee. Yeah. Did you have a conversation with your colleague in the end and end up kind of clarifying?
No.
Well, let's ask it this way. So you've been teaching students at the University of Melbourne for your previous 9 years or so, is that right?
Yeah,
you were involved.
That's right.
So you were the ultimate mentor. What do you want from a good mentee? Like, what does a good relationship look like to you? What were the things that made you be your best as a mentor to those students?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. In truth, unless people come to you and they're open and they're honest, then it's very hard to help them on their journey or help them figure out their way through whatever they're trying to navigate. And so I guess that could be two ways, because if you're not an approachable person or you're not open to that, then you might deter people from coming forward. But I think a lot of the students and it wasn't always like it was actually in general, it was never in a formal setting. It was often on the floor as we chatted, or they chit-chatted amongst themselves and I just put in, you know, and offer my advice. But it was always those people, I guess, who raised the subjects and raised their concerns and raised their worries, that were the people like you feel like you could help the most. And whether your advice did or it didn't, like at least you could give some input. So I guess that's one big thing. I don't think I ever had anybody come to me and ask me to be their mentor specifically, but I did have lots of great chats with people, or at least I thought they were great. Maybe they didn't think so, I don't know. But where you're just very open and you're honest with people. You know, sometimes, like, I guess you can try and like sugarcoat things and you want to say something to make things right, but that's not the right approach always, you know. And so I think there has to be a good degree of honesty, and that could be hard for somebody who is in a more vulnerable position, right? You know, somebody who might feel like they have more to lose from being honest, you know, because they might feel like they leave themselves open as I don't know, not like if they're not passing their exams, or if they're you know, not able to get a job or do interviews, then it's putting them, to some degree it's exposing them. So it can be hard if you're that person like trying to reach out and ask people for advice. So it takes some bravery on their behalf. And then for those of us who are a bit longer in the profession, I think when you have people who are junior to you, I think it's just really important to be approachable and just to remember what it was like when you were at that stage.
I was talking to, remember Dan Markwalder? Dan Markwalder from ages back. The big thing about his practice, and he's got how many practices now? Like
big groups of practice.
Big groups of practices, and they have a very structured mentoring program where they actually marry up people and make, you know, to go, hey, this is your mentor. And we've been doing that for the last year and a half, and I think that's really helped with the transition. So as an employer, maybe that's what it is that is required. It's like, hey, look, this is your mentee, this is you're the mentee, this is your mentor, you know. And we actually pay our vets to do that.
Wow. That's a pretty cool idea for sure. And then it probably puts a bit of onus on both people, or, you know, like to be that mentor that you should be, if you're actually assigned that role, rather than not knowing you're in that role, so to speak.
You talked earlier about team fit and figuring out whether the new team was the fit for you. How? You said you trust your gut. Are there specific things that you looked for, or is it just through experience that you know what works for you? How do you figure out what's your right fit?
I think when, you know, I went there, everybody seemed like pretty happy and chatty and open, and I think that for me was it was a telltale sign, you know. And also when I went there, the bosses were there and on the floor, and still it was happy and chatty, and you know, it had a nice feel. So it just, it was a bit of a feel of being there. And then I guess I talked a lot with the practice manager, I guess is his role, back and forth, because I did take quite a while, you know, to make the decision. And just, you know, everything in how he approached all of the conversations with me, it felt like it very much aligned with how I feel, or how I want to work, in terms of what's important to me in work-life balance, but what's so important for me for, you know, caring for the clients and caring for the patients. So all of those things aligned, and I never felt pressured at any stage. So there was a few different things along the way. And I think taking a bit of time with the decision helped, because then there was quite a few conversations and each of them had the same feel. And then at the end, it did come down to, I think, just a bit of trust in your gut. And I think we all probably don't do that enough. Yeah. And I don't know if my gut's any better now than it was like when I took my first job, because in truth, I really think that was why I chose my first job too. You know, I went there. They were all really lovely. They seemed to be exactly what they said on the tin, and I trusted that, and it worked out in my favor that time too.
How much? Well, I'm asking because you seem like a really warm, outgoing, pretty cheerful person, and I think that counts a lot. How much do you think what you bring to the team actually contributes to that culture, to your workplace being the place you want to be in?
Oh, I guess, it's a two-way street, you know, like I might not be the right fit for every practice, that's for sure. I can be loud and have a lot to say. And that certainly may not be the right fit for many places. And I'm okay with that, though. That's fine. It's definitely a two-way street.
Yeah, but what I meant was, I'm pretty sure you bring a really positive attitude and a very positive, cheerful demeanor to your workplace, which makes a big role. I suppose what I'm trying to get to is, if you walk into a workplace with the right attitude and I'm here and I want to have fun and I want to work hard and I want to contribute to this team, invariably you lift the team around you. Conversely, you can drag it down. You could work into the best workplace with your shitty attitude, and a month later suddenly it's not such a great workplace and you wonder what the problem is. And it might be that I suppose I'm asking it, and it gets back to the nerves of the first couple of days of a new workplace. My solution for myself of how do I get over those nerves, because I arrived at work and I went, well, I hope they don't do things too differently. So I start getting that imposter thing, and I had to set it in my mind to go, well, what can I definitely bring? I've got some skills for sure, and I know as a new grad you won't have all those clinical skills. I know I have some skills that I can bring, but what I can definitely bring, and what even as a new grad you can bring, is to say I can bring positivity, and I can bring energy. And if I walk in and there's that, some days you walk in and people are down and you go, oh, you can cut the atmosphere, and you go, I can change that. You actually have the power to change it. Instead of getting sucked in, you change it, and you don't need to be experienced to do that.
Yeah, no, totally. I listened to another podcast actually called The Happiness Lab, and it talked a little bit about that, about emotional contagion. I'd never heard of it before, but when I heard it, I was like, you know what, that makes perfect sense. You walk into a room and, if there's one happy person in there, then it's a bit infectious, right? Everybody is kind of gets into the mood. But on the converse of that, you walk into a room and one person walks in and they're thundering about and the door is slamming and they're sighing and everybody starts to be on tender hooks, and it's not a nice place to be. So I definitely think we all have a massive amount to contribute. It doesn't mean we all have to bounce in the door.
No,
good morning. But I do think that having a smile and having a positive attitude is 90% of the battle, isn't it? It's like I go back to, I always think everything else can be taught, like clinical skills can be taught. But if you go in and you do try your best to just bring as much as you can in the way of your energy, I think that's pretty important.
I saw it at work. I was sitting at work once and I was watching it happen. I was watching a single mood contaminate the whole work environment like that. And I had this mental picture of a tin of white paint, and then you get a drop of black paint in there and you mix it in. And it's no longer white paint, and it just spreads throughout that whole team. And just be careful that you're not the discoloration of the team.
That's exactly it. You kind of like when you paint the picture, it's like, what's it like when someone comes through who's cranky, and you're like, oh, it's terrible, and then you like that, and they're like, oh shit, am I like that? I don't know. I am like that. Oh my god, I'm like that. But emotional contagious, like, also, it's emotion doesn't necessarily just manifest in like a happy smile and like a cheerful mood. It also manifests in movement and energy. Like you walk in with energy or you move around with energy. I think that it's 100% true. Like you can feel the mood and someone can really bring it down. And you know what? It's your responsibility. It's not the team. You can't come to work and expect the team to lift your mood. I'm in a shit day. Like the team should help me feel better about it. Like that's unfair, really.
But the other thing as well, I think like some people aren't as aware of themselves as maybe others are. And, 100%. We all can kind of shy away from those conversations of that person who is like moody. They may not be totally aware of the energy they're bringing, and we all kind of like just back out and back away and don't deal with it a bit. Like when I was at the uni, one of the things we had started to do was when we were teaching students, we would do face-to-face and kind of play scenarios out so that they themselves could become more self-aware and realize what they were putting out. Because I think learning that is a bit of a journey in and of itself. And I think a lot of people, when they do realize that, they're open to change. Not everyone, but
this is where your open conversation with your mentor goes, hey, how am I on the floor? Honestly, tell me. Well, actually, to be honest, you're a cranky bot. You're a cranky bomb. Leave your shit
Well,
on.
there's two very quick solutions on both sides of that coin. It takes a little bit of courage. The one is, if you go to work and you are cranky, you don't always have to be bouncy and happy and cheerful. But I found it really works. And again, it comes down to that self-awareness. But if you arrive at work and your kids have given you a hard time, or you've had a fight with your partner, or say so. Walk in and say, hey guys, I'm in a shitty mood. Mm-hmm. If I'm cranky, it's not you. I'm having a tough time. You'll probably get a cup of coffee and a hug, and you'll probably feel better immediately. Mm-hmm. And vice versa, if there is that unself-aware person, to go to them with kindness and say, are you okay, mate? Because you're not your happy self. Is everything okay? And then suddenly they'll go, oh shit, I'm showing it. And it can, for the right sort of, for most people will take that as a oh yes, and they'll tell you, and everything ticks along a bit better after that.
Yeah, it's funny, we're always often afraid, isn't it, to say like what's really going on. You know, you put on a front and you think you're deceiving everybody, but actually you're not.
We're terrible. Our body language just shouts it out, doesn't it?
Totally, right?
You know those conversations that you have at conferences, back in the days when we still had big vet conferences, when people are chatting to the lecturers and asking questions, and you hear things like, this isn't really in the books, but here's what I think. It's in those kinds of conversations that the best nuggets of wisdom appear, the nitty-gritty real-life details that you can only get from years and years of experience. And it's exactly those kinds of conversations that we try to emulate on the Vet Vault Clinical Podcasts. We don't want lectures. We want to hear about the challenges, the tips, the stuff-ups, this is how I do it. Go to vvn.supercast.net to join in the conversation.
Okay, where to next? Let's talk about emergency as a career. Tell us your story, because you qualified and then you did mixed work in Ireland. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started off my kind of journey to ECC was a bit all over the shop, probably like a night in emergency. But I started off in large animal practice, and I think one of the reasons I kind of fell into that is because my teachers in Dublin were just on the largy side were really good fun and really approachable and friendly, and it was what we would have called a safe learning environment. You know, you weren't made to feel like a complete imbecile if you asked questions. So I think I was quite drawn to largies because of that, not necessarily because I had superior skills or ability in that area. So that's where I started off, and after a while I did kind of realize that it probably wasn't for me, as I was rolling around in the muck like trying to put back in uteruses that were bigger than me. That was maybe probably not the path I should have chosen, but kind of my dalliance with small animals started with doing charity trips. So after a couple of years out, a friend of mine actually suggested going to Peru. I thought, sounds like a lot of fun. So she was an emergency vet actually, and we went off there together to do a spay and neuter campaign. And that was kind of my first alliance at Smallies. And I kind of flitted back and forth between doing largies and charity work for a few years. And then when I moved to Australia, I ended up in small animal practice. And again, I kind of fell into it. I went to visit a friend and then got offered a job at her Christmas party. There were quite a few wines on board. And
so there's the answer of everybody saying they can't find vets. That's how you do it. You get them drunk, make them sign the contract.
Yeah.
I think it's called Shanghai.
It was funny because I was like, yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. I'll stay for a few months or 6 months or something, and then a year later I'm still there. And I feel like I was totally underqualified for that job as well to some degree, because I'd never really done small animal clinics before. And then the next thing they were making me sole charge. I was like, what? But they were really nice and supportive. So yeah, I ended up being there for a year. And what I found during that year was, like, all of the cases that I really enjoyed were all the snakes and the ticks and the trauma, like all these pigging dogs that you got called to at 3 a.m. because they'd had, been speared through the side. So it kind of got me started getting me thinking about emergency. And a friend of a friend had worked down in Melbourne Uni. And so they encouraged me to apply or to reach out to those guys. And I actually sent my CV to them when there was no job available. And it just kind of happened that shortly after I did that, a job came up. maybe by
Nice.
virtue of
Yeah.
them not having advertised for that long, or I ended up getting the job. And I was a bit shocked, really, to be honest, because I had no emergency experience. So kind of landing a job in the uni, I felt like, what have I done? I'm out of my depth here applying. But I was pretty steep learning curve. The first couple of years was exciting, but yeah, it was pretty tough.
So what was the role?
But
Were you teaching straight away, or were you just a consulting vet then? I said just.
no, so the role was a clinical tutor. I was part of a pretty big team, and they've been doing emergency for quite a long time. So it was a well-established part of the clinic. So you weren't just kind of thrown to the lions, here you go, work the nights by yourselves. They wouldn't do that, because obviously that wouldn't be good for them, for you, or for the clients, or the patients, or anything like that. So I had a lot of support when I started there. There was a lot of emergency vets there, and they had a pretty good facility. So started as a clinical tutor. And then gradually, as I built up my confidence, you got involved in more teaching, and as time went on, you kind of take on more roles. So yeah, it transitioned gradually. Towards the end, I was taking on more teaching responsibilities, which was really fun. I didn't actually go into the job, even though it was a university. I didn't really think about the teaching element of it, funnily enough. You might sound mad, but I actually hadn't thought about that. But then when I got into the job, I realized that actually that was the thing or one of the things that I really absolutely loved about it, and probably kept me there for as long as it did. It was really, really rewarding part of it. So, the emergency side was great, and I definitely loved all the cases. That in the end, the bit I maybe liked the most was the teaching side of it.
Yeah, I love teaching. I like having an impact on students, and also sharing stuff in an engaging and energetic way, which makes them kind of love the stuff that you love. When they come to the clinic, at least for us, because now we run the emergency rotation for one of the universities in our state. When they're there, our vets they're on, I would say they're on their A game, because
well, that's it. You're constantly being questioned and asked, and not in a bad way. They're thinking of questions that you could never have thought of, and so you kind of uncovers all the gaps in your knowledge, and so that's a really good part of it. It keeps you on your toes, and it's just fun as well, having that energy around.
So you've been an emergency veterinarian for almost a decade, right? Same with me. But I'd love to hear and Hubert's probably done it for 3 decades. But what do you feel? What do you think would be the downsides of emergency and critical care?
Yeah, what would be the downsides? It's funny because, in some ways the ups and the downs are not too dissimilar, right? Because you could argue that the downs are the hours that you work, the nights, the weekends, the long shifts. But on the flip side of that, you could actually work a number of long shifts in a row and then have a bunch of time off, so there's a pro and a con within the same, umbrella. And then working the nights, I mean, after a while, they definitely become pretty exhausting and less fun than all of the other shifts. But on the flip side of that, they're kind of the makings of you as well, because when you're there by yourself at night, you have to make decisions. You don't have that time I'll just wait for 6 to 12 hours and somebody else comes in. They're not the type of cases that you can't make decisions, otherwise you'd be repentant at your leisure, right? So I think even though they're tough, they're really pretty instrumental in making you stand on your own 2 feet and develop a lot of those decision-making skills. So I mean, they're a pro and a con, under the same kind of in the same way. And I think that's the same about the cases too, right? Because often the cases are really intense and they're really complicated, and they're come with owners who just have had their world fall apart. Their dog's just been hit by a car, and it's incredibly emotional and hard for them. But on the flip side of that, they're the cases that you can really make such a difference to. And I think working as an emergency vet for that length of time, you get really good at talking to people and counseling people through those difficult scenarios. I don't want to sound too eat, pray, love in it, but it does I think, I don't know, makes you a nicer person. But it does get exhausting that after a while, because all of those conversations with people who are upset, it's, it's hard. And then I guess the money side of it with emergency is another big thing that's hard, because people don't plan for emergencies.
Yeah.
It's not like everybody has an extra 10, 20 grand sitting around in their bank account that they're just waiting to spend on their animals. So you do see a lot of euthanasia in it as well. And that can be really hard, especially when it's financial. That it takes its emotional toll on you, I think, for sure.
It's I like that. I like a lot what you said. It is exactly, it's the yin and yang. The good stuff, the bad stuff. It just depends how you look at it, and depends how much of it you're getting. In the right dose, it's excellent. In too much, it's too much.
Yeah, that's
and
exactly it.
I really like that what you said about it. It can make you a nice person. I think it can go either way. You could go. I thought of it the other day. It's going to make you grow. You're either going to grow wise or you're going to grow bitter, and you got to decide which is going to be, because you get.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you say. You see people at their worst.
Yeah.
That comes down to the culture, your mentors as well, because then they will catch it, right? That will you go, oh, this client was an asshole, right? And they're like, you know what? I get it, right? They're hard, they're difficult, but no one plans for emergencies.
Yeah.
No one wants to be here at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday or Saturday night.
They should have brought this in 2 days ago. I mean, the stupid fucking client. And then you make yourself really upset. Yeah. And you're angry at the world and people suck. And then you flip it around. Or I've started flipping it around, and I go, well, they didn't bring it in 2 days ago because they didn't know. They don't have the knowledge that I have, or they were scared. They didn't want to come in because they were scared of what you're going to hear. And now they're here and they feel stupid. And you don't need to make them feel any more stupid. You just need to help them.
Oh, yeah. Here's the point. I don't even think of that anymore. I'm just like, okay, here it is now. What am I going to do? Because I used to think about it all the time. Why didn't they bring us? And it's like, so I just cut the question out of my head.
Yeah.
Don't even ask the question anymore now.
It just makes you frustrated, But the truth is, like what you just said, it's true. Like, you're expecting people to have that level of knowledge that you have. Like, I have a lot of friends who've got pets and they're smart people, but they don't always know what's going on or what's happening, and then they talk to you and you're like, oh yeah, we gotta get this sorted, get them in, and then they're totally panicked and they're like, if only I'd known, so it's hard to know those things sometimes as an owner. And then owners are always afraid of being like overreactive, right? Like, I don't want to be wasting your time. It's hard to know always when exactly that moment you should bring something in. And the truth is, like, how often do people roll their eyes if something comes in and there's no problem with it?
Flipping the question we asked before, which was around sort of, what was it? It was the downsides. Okay. What do you think then would be like your top 3-4 tips for surviving in emergency?
Oh, nice one, Gerardo.
Sometimes it comes out.
I didn't even write that question. Gerardo just made it up.
That's right. I have no original questions. All I am is a puppet for Hubert the Mastermind.
What would be the tip? Gosh, now let me think. You put me on the spot. So I think some of the tips, I guess, by virtue of being in a workplace that was supportive and had a lot of support staff around, I think I got lucky in that respect, because I didn't even know that it was a tip per se. So I think when you have a bit of support, that's hugely instrumental to being able to survive. And if you're thrown into the deep and you're there by yourself and you're trying to manage like really critical cases and you don't have enough people around, then I don't think you're ever going to be able to sustain that. So I guess finding, a place whereby if you're going to be managing really difficult cases, that there's support available to do that, and that there's enough staff to work those hours, that you have the kind of facilities required to manage those cases, because otherwise you probably shouldn't be in that position where you're doing that. And then I guess knowing how to manage your hours and what you can do and what you can't do, because I think and figuring that out, I guess, before you accept a job. Like if their plan is you do 7 nights in a row, but you know that you're not able to do that, I think embarking upon that is just insanity for you and for everybody else around you, because you will then be that nightmare person to work with, And so for me, coming towards the end, I knew that 3 nights in a row for me was max. I was exhausted by the end of that, and it wasn't initially how I was at the start, but it definitely was how I was at the end. I've stopped doing night shifts now, so I knew what my own limits were in terms of my hours. And so I think you got to be really clear about that and not try and overstretch yourself when you're doing those kind of intense long hours because it will be your downfall ultimately. So I think that's another big one. I think the other thing about emergency and critical care is I think we're all like really busy always trying to upskill in our clinical stuff. We're always doing courses and CPD, and I think we sometimes forget about the other side of it, like the non-clinical skills, being emotionally resilient and learning how to deal with all of the traumatic cases. And I mean that more from the sadness that can be part of emergency critical care, and the clients that can be difficult, whether or not they're difficult just because they're difficult, or whether or not they're difficult because they're going through emotional turmoil. Like learning how to deal with all of that, I think, is so incredibly important. I think you can sit down and you can read things and you can try and do courses on it. And you can also, I think, like for me, reaching out to some of the other vets that I worked with and trying to figure out how they deal with all of that stuff and talking about it. I think that's pretty important as well, and maybe that's not just emergency critical care, maybe that's veterinary as a whole. I think that's something that's pretty important.
Wow.
So you talk about sleep, and we talk about number of shifts and all of that. And to me, I personally think that's the thing that's going to be the end of an emergency career is the lack of sleep. There's ways of coping with it, but I think eventually it adds up. But while you're in it, and I love asking other emergency vets this, because I had my strategies, but what were your strategies for surviving with the disrupted sleep patterns of night shifts? How did you, what did your typical run look like? How did you cope? What did your morning look like after shift? When did you sleep? Did you have things that you found worked for you?
I didn't have mornings. I'm definitely not a morning person while I was an emergency vet. Whether I'll ever be, I'm not sure. But I think the longer I was an emergency vet, the more time I invested in trying to figure out what I should and shouldn't be doing. I think at the outset, I was always cutting corners. I was coming off a row of nights and sleeping for a few hours and then getting up and, trying to be functional. And so I was always trying to figure out where I could cut corners and shave off sleep. But I think then when I was in the career a few years, I figured out that probably wasn't that healthy. And so then I started to, I guess I read about shift work and how to manage it and trying to figure out even things like how you eat during your shifts can be impactful on how you survive shift work. So if you read some of the things about sleep and sleep studies, they talk a lot about ways to manage it. And so I think the thing that I learned from a lot of the reading I did was stop depriving yourself of sleep. I used to joke around and be like, oh, I've just borrowed from the sleep bank, I'm going to pay it back later, it's no problem. And then people would be like, that's not a real thing, Lorna. Go to bed.
Yeah, I used to think sleep was the enemy until Alex said this phrase. It's like, don't think sleep is the enemy. I was like, oh, but I could do so much if I didn't sleep enough. Please.
Yeah, I used to think, surviving on no sleep was like, yeah, you're a hero, You're
a hero, that's right, you're a hero. I remember doing this 22-hour shift, coming back 4 hours later, and then doing another 14 hours, and I came back, and I almost came back because of ego. Here he is coming back, he's doing it again. Yeah, it wasn't 4 hours, maybe it was the minimum turnaround was 5 hours, and I was back again. Yeah, and I did no one any favors coming back after that.
It is crazy. I saw emergency vets come off their shifts and then just not sleep that day, and stay up the whole day and then go to bed that night. I mean, I would have been like an absolute zombie. But I stopped. Some of the things I did was, I would have blackout blinds, make sure it was going to be as quiet as it could be, and just dedicate those 6 to 7 or whatever they may be hours to sleep, and not plan things, not say, I was going to commit to X, Y, or Z on the run of shifts I was working, just commit to sleeping and see that as equally important as everything else that you were doing, So I was a bit of a change in mindset, I think, a few years in, and figuring out that it wasn't a wise move to not take care of yourself,
From an employer perspective, the only thing that I would add here is that one of the common reasons why our vets decide to leave, outside of sleep and health, because they would just have chronic health issues after a while, if they couldn't sleep, would be a loss of social network. Because they didn't lose working Saturday, Sunday nights, Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights, because generally the busiest time in emergency hospitals, they just slowly start to disconnect from their friends, and they feel it. They feel, especially the young vets, they feel it.
Yeah.
All the vets seem to be like, oh, okay, I'll catch up when I want to catch up with them, but they're more proactive around it. But younger guys slowly start, like, they don't get invited to places, they don't get invited to parties and all that kind of stuff.
I never had that problem. I was always invited to it.
Maybe that was just you, mate.
Yeah. Fine. I never got invited to parties. And that was the reason why.
I know that's definitely a thing. But don't you find then, though, that like you end up hanging out with all the emergency team? You're always like figuring out who's off when they're off, because you're always off in the weird and wonderful times when nobody else is. So I have to say, like, during emergency, I met some great buddies because nobody else is off. So maybe they were great by virtue of just being the only people available.
But that's a strategy. That's a strategy to survive emergencies. You reestablish new friendship circles, but some people don't. They just see what they've lost, and then
maybe they just didn't like you, Jordan.
I like Lorna. I think we should make Lorna a permanent co-host.
I want you to edit that out, Hubert. That's a co-host request.
But that's like another thing about doing the nights that I found as well. You kind of feel like you're in the trenches with the people that you're working with. 100%. So you do develop some pretty close bonds, don't you? So you kind of are eager to see them outside of work. Sometimes it's bad because you talk about work a lot, but it's a way to diffuse too, So I used to find that you'd be so keen to catch up with those people you did the nights with, because you're like, yeah, we survived. We did it together.
That's true. I feel like everything you say sounds so familiar. That's that same pattern of I'm invincible, I don't need to sleep, I can do this, and then the slow learning, and then by the time you learn all of it, you go, oh, I'm burnt out, I can't do it anymore. I feel like we're talking about this, and the newcomers to emergency probably won't listen. They have to learn it the hard way. But if anybody's listening and going to do anything, you are not invincible. You do need sleep, and the sooner you learn it, the longer you're going to last.
I think I terrified one of the interns at our practice the other day when I coaching, stats from shift workers and the reduced longevity.
Yeah.
He was like, what? I'm going to die sooner? I was like,
definitely, you're going to die tomorrow.
At the end of the internship. What was I thinking?
Well, the reality is there is a study, I think, from somewhere in the Scandinavian countries. They classify shift work as a carcinogen on a par with cigarette smoke. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I read that, and I don't think I was the better of reading that for probably a good, 6 months, because I was anxious about it and thinking about it a lot. I think I upped my game at that stage a lot in terms of how I took care of myself.
Lorna, the great thing about a podcast is I can Google stalk people, and it's not creepy at all. It's my job. Tell us about. I'm sure you remember Winston.
Oh my God. Do I remember? Yeah, I mean, that was pretty incredible. Yeah. He was a little dog that came in one night to us when we were at the uni, and he presented dead on arrival. And so it was one of those where, it was like, I think it was a Sunday night and everything was under control. It was maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning. And so all the patients were kind of sleeping, everybody was on top of their treatments, and it was nice and blissful and peaceful. And then the next thing you know, we saw this car speed in, because we've got cameras and we can watch the cameras from the emergency room. And we just knew immediately the panic that was about to ensue. This lady jumped from the car and she rushed to the door and was banging on the door. And we were lucky enough to have a security guard who was pretty invested in all the patients and pretty happy to help out, with anything and with everything. And so rather than waiting for one of us to come up, he just instinctively knew it was really bad. He just took the little dog and ran down to us in the emergency room. And so it was dead on arrival. That sinking feeling when you get this little patient and that their people are just so distraught, but you're like, oh gosh, he's dead. And obviously you start CPR immediately, but you just, you think it's never going to work out.
Yeah, you kind of think you're wasting your time.
Yeah, I guess you have, so many CPRs in emergency that a law of averages comes into play. And unfortunately, most of them you can't resuscitate. We started doing a resus, and there was myself and 2 nurses there. So we were pretty lucky in that respect, because I don't think you can really do a successful resus unless you have that number of people at a minimum. So we worked on him for, I guess, I don't know, because time goes, kind of fast and slow in those moments. But it probably was like somewhere in the region of 5 to 10 minutes. We were doing CPR, and one of the nurses was watching the end tidal and was watching it creep up, and then she was like watching the ECG, and she was like saying to me, Lorna, I think we're getting him back. And I was saying, don't be silly, come on, do this. Like give your, like we gotta keep doing this. And then she was like, no really, and so then I'm feeling for a pulse, and then you can feel this pulse and you can hear the heart. It's not just like dissociated electrical activity. Yeah, lo and behold, we got this little guy back, and it was pretty special. Remember when we got him back again, like you're the ultimate pessimist as an emergency vet, because I was like, I better go get his people fast because he could arrest again. And then so I ran down the corridor and I was like, come and see him, he's alive now, but just I'm gonna worry you, he could I'll die again, so and then the next thing he was like lifted his head, and he made a full recovery. It was just I felt like completely like delirious and elated. I think we all did, and
what actually happened to him? Why did he die?
So it was his folks had gotten up in the middle of the night, and it was actually quite sad because they had to go to the hospital because their granddad had passed away, and they got up and their little dog woke up, and so they fed him a treat and he had choked on it. And so just like a healthy, lovely little guy, and then the next thing you know, it was pretty special. I think I was walking on clouds for quite a while after that.
That's awesome.
I think it's a big draw, isn't it, with emergency, like those type of cases. I mean, if we hadn't gotten them back, then they're the ones that are so incredibly sad. But gosh, when you do, it's a feeling that's hard to match, right?
Very much so. Very much so.
I don't think I've ever had one like that. That's why I had to tell that story. It's actually, I read that, I was like, all right, I'm going to start trying harder again.
Do you want me to teach you how to do CPR, Hubert?
Well, it does. It reinstills your faith in it, because you do get a bit disheartened, right? Sometimes,
Yeah, I love those stories.
I could chat all night. I think it's
possibly the longest podcast we've done.
I've got about 5 more questions. I wanted to talk about. I was going to talk about death and dealing with death of patients. Again, because of a thought I had the other night, I realized, and tell me if this is just me, but I think as you get better and you get more skilled at saving complicated patients, you start getting this attitude of nobody's going to die on my shift unless I decide you're going to die. You know what I mean? If we're going to you can die because I euthanize you. Because the owner said, but otherwise you're not fucking dying until my shift is over. And it's almost an ego thing. I found it myself. I was like, that's not right, really. But if it has to go, I don't know.
Yeah,
that can make sense, because I don't remember the last patient that actually passed away, died without
your consent,
without or recommendation. They're like finding a patient dead.
Crikey, I better not say anything against that then. No, I've never had it happen to me either. No.
That did make me think. There was something else that happened at another job where another vet said something about helping out at a wildlife hospital, and there's obviously a fairly high euthanasia rate, and one of the vets said it can get some vets down the euthanasia. Which made me think a bit about it, and I was like, weirdly, it didn't really bother me. I feel like, well, to me, a patient dying because there's something seriously wrong it's not such a big deal for me. I think a lot of vets take it almost personally, and I go, no, well, look, we're all going to die. All of our patients are going to die eventually. If it's for the right reasons, I don't find it all that depressing. And I don't know if it is a point worth bringing up if there are young vets out there who still struggle with it, who find it a hard thing to deal with. Are you at peace with it, both of you?
I think it depends on a lot of things. I think it depends on the cause of why you're euthanizing something and how heavily you've become invested with people and the patient. Like if you've been working on a case for days and days and you're like so emotionally involved with those people as well, they're the euthanasias that I find really hard, because you're just gutted for them as well. I think we have these sick patients and we have such high hopes for them, and we're really trying to do everything you can to save them. And so when you do lose one, it can be emotionally hard. I do also accept that death is part of life, and we do our best, and sometimes it's not enough, and that's true for people and for animals, right? So I think you do have to make peace with that as well, and learn how to accept it, and learn how to move on from it, learn from it, but move on from it, because I think if you constantly replaying it in your mind, I think that's so very destructive. And then there's euthanasia, where you euthanize older patients that have multiple terminal chronic issues and they're suffering. And for me, I totally accept that. I think that it's something that actually is quite important that we can offer our patients to give them a peaceful passing. I think if you can end suffering after an animal's had a beautiful life with loving people, then I truly do think that's a gift at the end. And then I guess there's the other euthanasias where, there are animals that you don't want to euthanize, like in terms of people don't have enough money to treat their pets, and that can be gut-wrenching. So I don't know if I'll ever probably be at peace with that. I find it hard. I think you do again have to learn how to accept it, right? And learn how to accept that sometimes people are making decisions between feeding their kids and treating their 100%. Pets, and that's like, it's not often it's not a choice that they want to be making. So I guess you have to accept it in that realm, but they can be hard ones. So yeah, I do think it's a bit of a journey coming to accept and find your path through it. And I definitely do think it's something that's hard for younger vets.
I agree with what you're saying. Like in emergency, euthanasia rates, like on average, is somewhere between 15 to 20% of the patients we see, depending on the hospital we work in, and depending on the socioeconomic area.
Yeah.
And there are shifts. I think the record I've done in one shift was 8 euthanasias in one shift.
Wow. Yeah.
And I just felt like Dr. Death, and it's really taken me a while to get used to the whole idea of euthanasia, and it's part of my role, it's part of my job, it's part of how I contribute to society, contribute to pets, and kind of have a process by which I kind of go through, where it's like kind of like a formula which sort of settles nicely with me, regardless of the euthanasia, whether or not it's a healthy pet that, not a healthy pet, but like a pet with mild, moderate illness where an owner elects euthanasia, or a really sick old one. It's kind of really just acknowledging the pet for what they've contributed to the world, and then being there and kind of just being like, and thanking them. And so kind of like, thank you for being there, and you've contributed. And that really helps me, because in the process of euthanasia, in my head, I thank them, and it's a part of my role is that act of service. So I do struggle. One of the things that I struggle with the most actually is euthanizing pest wildlife species, like the purely healthy little rabbit in Australia, in Queensland, rabbits, or what do you call it, like hares or whatever. They come, they're so cute. They look like a little Easter bunny, and then no one wants to do it, and I have to do it, and it kills me. But 20 seconds later, I'm fine. I move on. It's just, it hurts at the time, but then it's an act of service.
Yeah, it's a comfort thing. So I think when I said the wildlife thing, I don't see that it will bother me, because I still feel like, well, I'm there, I'm cutting short suffering by doing that. If I wasn't there doing that nasty business, it would be out there dying slowly in the bush, or at the same time
getting in by ants slowly or something like that.
Yeah, so it's I've said this to vets before. The reality is none of us are going to be euthanized unless things change really quickly. All of us are going to go through some shit, and eventually it's going to end. So if we could provide comfort and make it shorter, and even if it is the ones that you could have potentially saved, well, if you weren't there as a veterinarian and the owner couldn't come to you to help out, that animal would suffer and die in pain at home. So whatever the reason, it's still a kindness. It took me a while, man. My very first euthanasia I remember really well. As a student, broken humerus, no money, and I had to go cry out the back, euthanized. Had to excuse myself from the hospital and go outside. I need to go to the toilet, and then go cry in the toilet a little bit, which is, I laugh now, but it's not. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. But
Yeah, it is a big deal. The other like time that I found euthanasia really hard with shelters, like I remember having to go to a pound a few times and euthanize the animals there. And that was awful. Like that, that was probably the worst, because they're healthy, they're just, there's nothing wrong with them, and that's not right. Yeah, it is a tricky part of our job, right? Because it's got a good side to it, but
the happy story of Winston.
No, but this is the stuff that people want to hear too, right?
Well, the funny thing is, the most thanks I've received in my career, and I don't think I'm the only emergency vet who says this.
No, 100%.
It's actually so many of the euthanasias that you do, right? Yeah. Because maybe because we are good at it as emergency vets, because we do it a lot and we can counsel people through it. I do think it accounts for a lot, and it counts, like, it's a massive thing in that person's life when they're taking their pet to somebody to euthanize them. And I think being kind and being patient and help guiding people through it, I've received more thanks for that than I have any of the heroics that I've ever done.
And what a privilege to be trusted with it, actually. I think this line came from somebody on the podcast where I said because I often struggled when you do a good euthanasia. I say good because, people are thankful. And when they say thank you, what do you say back? The reflex is to say it's a pleasure. Well, it's not a pleasure. And I think it was one of our guests who said, and I use that now. All I say is thank you for trusting us to help you through this.
Yeah.
All right. On that happy note, let's start wrapping up. Do you listen to podcasts, Lorna?
I listen to some. Not that I'm not an avid podcast listener, I'll be honest.
I can't believe I've just wasted 2 hours interviewing somebody who doesn't even.
I could have lied, but then you probably would have asked me which my favorite ones were, and then I would have been like,
So Lorna, you used to teaching students. We get all your students you've ever taught, and they're all starting in their first year in veterinary science as young vets, and you have a couple of minutes to give them one little bit of advice for their veterinary careers. What is your one bit of advice?
I think the most important thing is, we've probably talked about it already, is just not to lose your identity to the profession, to see it as your profession, and it can still be your passion and your love, and you can still be realizing your dream, but not to completely lose yourself to it, to maintain yourself outside of it, to maintain your relationships outside of it, to not allow it to completely consume your personal life. Because I think that is the biggest thing. For me, I think that's one of the biggest things that can contribute to burnout, and people becoming fatigued with the profession and the work and becoming disillusioned. So I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing that I would offer as a piece of advice.
I love it. Definitely it has to be up there in my top 5 things as well. Awesome. Lorna, thank you so much. You've been an absolute champion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Hopefully we'll catch up in person sometime. I think it would be fun.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.